These are the participants and victims of a secret chapter of the Iraq War.
On our way back to our fob, which is Fob Falcon, we started getting sick, noticing a horrible smell in the cab of our vehicle.
We each had pinpointed pupils, which is a telltale sign of nerve agent exposure.
We hit it with the M8 paper and it instantly became positive for mustard agent.
The United States did not find what the Bush administration predicted when it invaded Iraq in 2003, an active weapons of mass destruction program. But during almost a decade of occupation, American troops repeatedly encountered and quietly destroyed thousands of aged chemical weapons. The discoveries clustered around Iraq's former chemical weapons production center, an area now under the control of the Islamic State. The weapons, found in hidden caches or in makeshift bombs, wounded Americans and Iraqis in at least 6 separate incidents. Most of this was kept secret, including from Congress, from those most at risk, and from doctors who had organized their care. Many victims of chemical agent exposure, American troops from the cat-and-mouse contest against improvised bombs, were denied military honors or medical care. The perils were a consequence of arms sales and foreign policy choices of long ago. During the 1980s, Saddam Hussein developed robust chemical weapons programs with extensive foreign support. Rockets that would hold nerve agent were provided by Egypt and Italy. Tens of thousands of artillery shells, shipped to Iraq from Europe to be filled with mustard agent in Western-built production lines, were of American design. As Mr. Hussein's chemical munitions stockpile grew, his forces used these weapons repeatedly, including against Iranian troops and Iraqi civilians. Iraq suffered defeat in Kuwait in 1991. The United Nations scoured its bases and production centers to destroy the country's chemical warfare programs.
My fellow citizens, at this hour, American and coalition forces are in the early stages of military operations to disarm Iraq, to free its people, and to defend the world from grave danger.
The Bush administration, saying that the United Nations inspections had failed, argued that Mr. Hussein still hid an active program. The thousands of chemical munitions that soldiers later discovered showed otherwise. They had been manufactured before the Persian Gulf War more than a decade earlier.
My team leader and I got a call from the headquarters at Fob Fair & Huggins, basically stating that we needed to respond to an improvised explosive device incident.
Private First Class Michael Yandel served in Iraq in 2004. On May 15th, his ordnance disposal team investigated a makeshift bomb in southwestern Baghdad.
Tell him thank you. Thank you.
As the occupation dragged on, improvised explosive devices became one of the primary weapons used against American troops, and the main cause of their wounds.
Get up! Get up! Get up!
Many were built from conventional high-explosive munitions that had been left unsecured after the invasion.
That looks like some kind of shell.
When troops found bombs or weapons caches, explosive ordnance disposal technicians were sent to destroy them and to gather their remnants for evidence.
We saw that there was a round in the middle of the road, and we sent our robot down to investigate and got video footage of what appeared to be a rusted out, cracked open 155 millimeter explosive round.
PFC Yandel and then Staff Sergeant James Burns put the broken shell in their truck. On the drive back, they sensed something was wrong.
We started getting sick, noticing a horrible smell in the cab of our vehicle, and trying to decide what that smell was and what was causing us to get sick. And we thought it might be a chemical round, trying to play it off as there's no way possible.
By the time they reached their base, their pupils had narrowed to pinpoints, one indication of nerve agent exposure. The shell in their truck had held sarin.
It was very surreal. One just doesn't really expect to deal with nerve agent, I guess. Not then.
Before the war, military planners had prepared for the possibility that Mr. Hussein would fire his chemical rockets and shells. Those attacks did not happen. Dr. Dave Edmund Lounsbury is a retired colonel in the Army Medical Corps. He helped organize plans to treat victims of large-scale chemical attacks.
We were in Iraq. We had this half-baked protocol. We had our MOP gear. We waited for these weapons of mass destruction, A, because we were curious, B, because we wanted to get rid of this god-awful gear, and C, because we were anticipating these casualties. And none of that happened.
That planning focused on one element of Iraq's presumed stockpile.
They were very confident that the chemical weapon that we would encounter for casualties in Iraq was going to be mustard, which is otherwise known as sulfur mustard.
Specialist Andrew Goldman served in Iraq in 2008. On August 16th, his three-man disposal team answered a call near Camp Taji, 20 miles north of Baghdad. An American infantry patrol had found buried artillery rounds, not knowing that many of them contained sulfur mustard. This footage shows another team preparing to destroy recovered munitions in Iraq. Specialist Goldman's team prepared a similar demolition. The explosion left a blast crater, which the team approached.
Anytime you dispose of anything like that, you want to go down and check, make sure everything went away. So we go down range and we look, and we have a lot more rounds than what we started with. You can see cracks in the side of the crater where you can see rounds still stacked up on top of each other.
Here, Specialist Goldman inspects the blast crater.
Yeah, I say we use not the hole.
Hard to get in and out of?
Yeah, I just sunk down.
The team now had more mustard shells to destroy. They asked the nearby infantrymen to stack them for demolition.
Because that's the first time they asked us to help with something like that, because there was so many.
Sergeant Philip Duquette was an infantry team leader. He formed part of a human chain to move the shells as the disposal team pulled them from the crater.
As I'm handing a round up, just an oily, reddish substance just kind of pours out of the round as I'm handing it up to my teammate. And Eric, Sergeant Dooling, said, hold on just a minute. Just as a precautionary measure, we already had one scare today where we thought it was Kim. It was already on our mind. So he went to the truck and got some more M8 paper. And when I tested it this time, it was an obvious positive.
This shows an Iraqi disposal team practicing what is known as a hasty decontamination. At the blast crater near Taji, Staff Sergeant Eric Dooling ordered the soldiers to pull back and clean up. His team put on protection suits to finish the job. Footage taken by the infantry on the perimeter shows the destruction of the chemical shells. Exposure symptoms soon appeared.
We got out, we washed our hands, we didn't think much of it. We was driving back, my knife was on my leg, on my right thigh, and it was irritating me, so I thought it was my knife. I went to bed, woke up that morning with a small blister.
Sergeant Duquette's blister grew to the size of his fist. The medics acted quickly. He and another soldier were rushed to a military hospital, then flown to Germany. By then, the blister covered his upper thigh. His medical records are explicit. He had been exposed to mustard agent. None of this was known to Sergeant Dooling's team as they began suffering on another base. The clinic where they sought care seemed unprepared to treat them.
I actually had one doctor say, well, if you're not defecating on yourself or foaming at the mouth, there's nothing we can do for you. And I said, that's great, because if we were like that, it'd be nerve agent, we'd be dead.
The next day I wake up and I looked like I had a complete body sunburn, just red in places that have never seen the sun. The first doctor I saw told me that I wasn't hit with mustard agent, and she said because I wasn't throwing up or I wasn't sick or showing, severe blistering and stuff like that.
For 2 weeks, the wounded soldiers received only minimal treatment.
The blister on my butt cheek had gotten a lot bigger, and I'd also had blisters forming on my thighs. They were large up top, and they started getting smaller as they went down.
Some other people in the unit were like, this is not right, these guys should be looked at. So we took pictures of Goldie, wrote down our symptoms, and we sent through back channels back to the States.
At last, the military's medical system woke up. Sergeant Dooling's three-man team was flown from Iraq, but told not to discuss the incident.
When we got to Walter Reed, we were there a few days, and they called us in and said, you've been exposed to mustard agent.
All of us came up positive for having HD mustard, distilled mustard in our bloodstreams.
Dr. Lounsbury had been reassigned to Walter Reed, part of a small group of doctors monitoring casualty reports from Iraq and Afghanistan to prepare a textbook on treating battlefield trauma. The chemical warfare cases were not circulated to him and his peers.
I never personally attended a case of chemical injury. I never heard about a case of chemical injury, and I never met any colleague who had seen a case of chemical injury. If medical command had been made aware of chemical casualties, that would have been a wildfire notification, and medical facilities would have made the proper preparations.
The long-term effects of mustard exposure are not fully understood. Potential consequences include scarring of the airway and cornea, infertility, and increased risk of cancer. After the 2004 sarin incident, the Army issued new orders for the treatment and tracking of chemical exposure patients. Many victims did not receive the required standard of care.
I still have residual blisters every now and then. I still have a lot of trouble breathing. I have a constant headache. I haven't not had a headache since 2008. Sometimes it gets worse, sometimes it's not so bad.
Sergeant Dooling suffered an array of health issues, including breathing problems that required surgery in 2013. He believes these difficulties were caused by sulfur mustard.
They cut my upper jaw and broke my lower jaw and moved everything forward, and then cut out right here and pulled the tongue muscle forward to help stretch out everything in my throat to open it up so I can breathe easier.
All three members of Sergeant Dooling's team were nominated for the Purple Heart. The Army denied the awards. The United States suppressed knowledge of the thousands of chemical weapons its soldiers encountered in Iraq.
If the Allies had found weapons of mass destruction, and more to the point, if Americans had been injured by them, it strikes me as though that might be something you would make a big deal about. These patients would have been celebrities in their own right because they were chemical casualties. But there was no such report.
Only thing I can think of is politics. Doesn't jive with the story they wanted.